17th, February 18th, live trading, San Diego. We got the Lowe's Coronado. I mean, what else would you want? This event is limited to 50 people. Look at your calendar, clear it, make sure you show up. If you want to be a rebel, this is the place to be. You got to sign up for it now. Giddy up, baby.
Yeah, that's what happens when your wife is yelling just before the live broadcast.
You know, the beautiful part, John, is that's the beginning of what's already started off as a complete shit show. Let's be honest. I mean, holy shit. Excuse my language, but it's like.
Yeah. Well, we had a bit of a surge. Maybe not the same surge the Vikings had or the Raiders, Pete, but we had a surge nonetheless.
It's like that surge from Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah. I'm Surge.
Hello, I'm Surge.
I remember Surge.
Since we started, John got grumbled up and then had to come back in. And then Jared was going to come on, but then John came back on. And then John's wife decided she wanted to see what he's up to. Well, it's no worse than my son, John. He purposely now, just to be a prankster, calls me at 1 o'clock every day just to do it. So I answered and gave him my now patented response, which I can't probably say on here. So anyway, it was a good weekend.
As you guys know, we only do 1 minute of macro on this show, Pete. And by the way, I was showing people how I can do a perfect flip with my pancakes. You'll have to check that out on Twitter. It was the tweet preceding this. But you know what, Pete? As far as macro today, I think the fact that the NASDAQ stocks are still under severe pressure, they haven't let up at all. And we'll start seeing what kind of margin calls we get in the afternoon. What do you got, Pete?
Yeah, I think you're right, John. But I think there's a bunch of different things in play right now. You know, going back to last week, I just feel like we've got a hangover. I really do. I mean, if you go back to last week, you look at the consumer and everybody's, you know, for a while there, everybody said, well, the consumer's strong. You and I didn't say that. We said, you know what? The consumer's only buying because they're willing to go into huge debt, and they keep going into debt. And now all of a sudden you start to see some of that spending cut back. And why is that? Well, because there's so much damn debt. These guys don't know what to do at 18 and 24%. I think that's biting people the closer we get to Christmas Day itself.
Yep. And I know during Unusual, Pete, we're both going to be talking about stocks that are impacted by exactly what Pete just described, folks, because it is going to be tough. But let's start with something that's up big today, Pete. This one was up 100%, then 200%. Then it was pushing towards almost 300% on the day. Basically, they traded as many call options in this one, Madrigal Pharmaceutical, last week as they traded in the entire month of November. And they had a big phase 3 trial victory, Pete, and that's why stock's up so big.
Yeah, they reached some of the endpoints, John. And I think the most important thing that we've tried to convey to people while we were on television consistently, as well as from here with the Rebel's Edge, there's a huge difference between phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and going into the commercial side of things. This is phase 3. These guys have crushed it. As a matter of fact, they're trying to get out there and accelerate that approval process. If they're able to do that, John, this is a drug that's going to happen the first half of this coming year, 2023. That's huge. That's why it's getting the jump that it's getting right now. And this is a very critical drug for those that actually do suffer from liver fibrosis. So this is a major deal, and this one actually makes a heck of a lot of sense.
Yep, and it puts them smack dab in the acquisition area too, Pete, because you and I know that drug companies are not like Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg tried to build his own metaverse, and that doesn't usually work as well as finding somebody who's really doing it and then buying them, which is what, most of the drug companies do. They find somebody who has a therapeutic, who took the risks, 1 out of 10, maybe 1 out of 100, get all the way through phase trials. And once they do, then you acquire them. I think that's another reason you keep your eye on this one and why it's up so big. All right, let's hit the second one, Pete, which is likewise this one for a blood pressure that people that are on schizophrenia drugs, apparently one of the issues there that CERE addresses, Crireval, is basically that they don't cause your blood pressure to skyrocket, which is a good thing, because anytime your blood pressure skyrockets, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, and this particular drug, and we're talking about some schizophrenia and all the rest. It's phase 1. They've got one drug there, John. They've also got another in phase 2. So these are a little bit lower. But what I really like about this company is they've got a myriad of other areas as well, but Parkinson's, and they've got a couple that are in phase 3. So that is a monster area. Those are blockbuster type drugs if you can get those to market and you go through the approval process and that whole thing. I like it a lot, John. I think this move is understandably good today for what they're doing. Range is 20 to 41, call it. It's sitting at 31. This is a stock that I think we need to all keep a very, very close eye on, especially on some of those other drugs as they're getting closer to getting onto the market. I think this is one of those companies that potentially is going to test that 52-week high in the next couple of months.
Yeah, sure could. And, 52-week high, like you said, Pete, just $9 away. Yeah. And again, potential acquisition target if they continue to get great results like this. All right. How about MESA Airlines, MESA? I've flown these guys a lot, Pete, because if you end up going on out to, the likes of Aspen or maybe even Salt Lake occasionally, they fly those regional jets or RJs. And sometimes they're American Airlines jets, and other times they're MESA. Well, apparently MESA's going to go away from American now, and they might be throwing themselves into the arms of United, Pete. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, shares were up 4%, 8%. Now they're up over 11% at mid-session.
Although we do always have to keep one thing in mind, John. We're talking about a company that's under $50 million market cap. It is small. So we keep that part in mind. This is a big deal for them, though. They're getting rid of the whole thing, the relationship with American, moving over to United, and that whole process is going to be very, very interesting. This was a $6 stock to start off the year, and here we are now. It's up 9%, but it's still a stock that's about $1.28. Keep an eye on that. It does feel like you could almost trade it like an option because of the stock price right now. But just remember, there are some risks that go involved here. And can they be a company that they are striving to be and be a much more profitable company? Maybe with the whole United deal, we'll see. But definitely a nice move today, John, off of this move away from American.
Yeah, and keep in mind what Pete said about the small cap. Because this is not one of those stocks that, in fact, they're so small, Pete, they're probably, I believe they're rumored to be selling off some planes so that they can, basically service this acquisition better with fewer of those planes, not as much overhead. All right, Disney. So many of you have heard of Avatar, of course, the first billion-dollar winner. I think James Cameron with Titanic, he had one that was almost $1 billion, Pete, but he'd never had $100 million opening weekend. He had that with this one, basically Avatar, The Way of Water, but everybody thought it was going to be even bigger. And for that reason, it's like when you miss on earnings. You had great earnings, but not as good as they were looking for. That's what they had with this movie. And you know what? He said $2 billion gets you to break even for this one, Pete. I think that's nuts.
If that's the case, good luck. I'll tell you what, the previous management did an absolute, and when I say that, I mean the man sitting at the top who's now gone. They ousted him, and now Iger's back. And Iger's got to be angry about a lot of different things, John, one of which is the cost of this movie. Second, I think Iger's smart enough to have said, hey, you know what? This movie is how long? It's 3 hours and 12 minutes. Are you crapping me? I mean, look, Football, they barely can get your attention for the entire game, but they definitely get you for most of it. And we're going to be talking about that in just a second, because some of the greatest games ever played was this weekend. But John, how can you possibly say, you know what, in this environment when everybody is their focus is down to seconds, not minutes or hours, and they're going to put out a 3-hour movie? I got to tell you something. I think this thing will probably do well, especially early on, like it has, although it's going to continue to miss a lot of the estimates that people thought, which was they came in with 134 million for the quarter, or for the opener. They were looking for 150, 175 million. They completely missed that. So there's a lot of problems there. The last thing I'd say is, how about the huge operating losses, John, in direct to consumer that they had last quarter? Oh, it was only $1.5 billion. So there's a lot of things right now for Iger to fix along the way as they continue on in changing Disney back to Disney. But this is not an impressive first weekend, I don't think, based upon all the costs and where they are right now.
Yeah, you got to really feel for the shareholders, which I used to be, Pete, and right now I'm not a shareholder. I'm just an option trader in Disney. I haven't seen a strong reason to want to own the stock long term. Even with Iger coming back, it gave up most of that big jump that it had when he announced he was coming back. And, I haven't seen a reason really to believe in it as strongly as I have in the past. So that's just me. All right.
I completely agree with you, John, by the way. I just want to add, here it is pushing at 52-week lows. You're not interested. I'm not interested. It's going to take some time, and Iger's just got back. So I don't think it's something where we've got to feel pressure to jump on them right now. So I think it's okay to be sitting in the weeds and waiting for a reason, a catalyst of why we need to buy or want to buy the stock itself.
Yep. Well, what about CarMax, Pete? KMX. Top of the show, we talked about how the consumer is stretched. You talked about all the debt they've piled on. I think in the last month, the consumer borrowing through credit cards, the credit cards that they don't fully repay, was up 15%, and it's pushing up to record levels right now. So CarMax is a reflection, a little bit of that, Pete, because these guys are, of course, a car seller. And KMX, February double puts, that's 55 puts, double nickel puts, were bought for about $3.50. So that means with the stock at basically 61, somebody thinks that I either want protection or I have a bet that it goes lower between now and February. In other words, a little over 2 months and 2 weeks from right now. So I'm on that bandwagon, Pete, but I'm not in the 55 puts. I'm in the 60 puts. And my intention is, if pressure forms and keeps pushing them lower, I will sell a lower strike put against it 1-to-1, just because I like doing it that way.
I think it makes total sense, John. You'd want to take advantage of the situation, and that's a very, very smart option strategy that you'd want to have on. I got one for you. How about Annaly Capital? This one's pretty interesting as well, John, because, well, we're talking about mortgage finance. These guys, when you talk about debt, holy smokes, $64 billion in debt, but that's part of the nature of the beast of what it is that they do. They've got a strong dividend. People will chase stocks for dividend, and here's why you don't want to do that. Just take a look at Annaly and look at what that chart looks like year to date. Look at what it looks like 2 years, 5 years, whatever time frame you want to look at. People who chase dividend for dividend is a mistake. It has underperformed, despite the fact that right now, John, they've got a 16% dividend yield. Sounds great. People get all excited about that. The reality is the stock is going down faster than that dividend rate is going higher. And that's a major problem. And what we've got going on right now is somebody came out and bought 10,000 of the February 20 puts, which will be part of the next earnings that they come out with. One print of almost the entire 10,000 of those Feb 20 puts for 86 cents. Somebody wanted a position, they wanted to be in immediately, and they wanted the entirety of that trade. I like what we're seeing here, John. I think this is a stock. When I say I like it, I like seeing what the activity is telling us, which is by February, this son of a gun is probably going to be below 20, and I happen to agree with him.
Yeah, I I think anybody that wants to bet that consumers are stretched, that the companies that service consumers, Annaly obviously big in that space. I'd throw Ally, Pete, ALLY, also in the mortgage and used car loans and things like that. Anybody that's in that space, I think, has the wind at their back on the short side, because I think all of those will be stretched just like the consumer. All right, what do you got as far as sports from the sports beat this weekend, Pete? Biggest turnaround in NFL history, and you were part of it, really.
Well, I'll tell you, it absolutely was amazing, John, but it shouldn't be. And I say that for this reason. When you watch the Minnesota Vikings this year, this is a team that we've talked about. I've been very critical of their defense, and I think rightfully so. Their defense is number 32 of 32. So there's a good reason why I don't like their defense. But in this particular game, it was a lot different than the game when they played up at Buffalo and they trailed 24-10. That was a different game altogether, but they came all the way back. And oh, by the way, they beat them 33-30. So very, very interesting game in overtime for the Vikings. Well, this week we have a team that's down 33-0 at the half, John. But when you look at the Vikings, the Colts had one offensive score touchdown in the first half for the 33 points. They had a punt block for a touchdown. They had an interception for a touchdown. They had a whole bunch of field goals. So it really wasn't necessarily the defense, which has been the Achilles heel for this team. This was just a lot of mistakes and not playing fundamental football. They came out in the second half, and before you know it, John, it's Dalvin Cook for 60-plus yards on a screen pass. It's Jefferson is the MVP. I honestly believe that. This guy at receiver is unbelievable. But KJ Osborne had the game of his life as well. Kirk Cousins comes out there, and there's a guy that you and I know pretty well who's always told me he's a choker. Well, turns out that he's got the most fourth quarterback comebacks of any quarterback in the NFL. This is the guy that's supposedly the choker. Well, he's not. And I've been saying for a long time, it's the defense of the Vikings that's cost them a lot of wins in the fourth quarter or the final couple of minutes of the game, not the offense. And Kirk Cousins has absolutely been on fire. 460 yards he threw for, John, and most of that in the second half. So an absolutely incredible game that came down to the wire again, and they came out on top. The Vikings are absolutely in heaven right now. Did you see the game, and what did you think? Did you love what you were seeing from Kirk?
I did. I loved that game, Pete. I liked the Dolphins-Bills game as well. And the one that I just couldn't stop watching was the Raiders, because the Raiders were up. And then, typical of the Raiders, the other team comes roaring back. And that was a real problem when the other team came roaring back. But then as they go in, Pete, they do this multilateral thing, thinking that they're going to, basically be the Cal Bears. And they end up tossing the ball back to number 55 for the Raiders, and he just took it to the house. It was freaking amazing. Those fans were going crazy. I loved that game. The Raiders.
What made that, John, such a stupid play, and it was a stupid play. Don't misunderstand it. It really was. They're tied up. They can go into overtime. But instead, they choose to do this multilateral play, as you're talking about. They're running downfield, and the final guy on the lateral decides to whale it back about 25 or 30 yards to get intercepted, only for that player to run all the way down and score the touchdown. I got to tell you, you almost have to question, was that Belichick's call, or whose call was that? Because somebody made that call. Hey, we're going to do this. They didn't need to panic, and they did, and that just shows you that's a team that probably should not be in the playoffs, the New England Patriots, because mistakes like that cost you, and they have ramifications, and that might just keep them out of the playoffs this year.
Yeah, well, it was very suspect, Pete. I'll put it that way. Now, what about, I know you got more NFL stuff, because college, it's really just a few throwaway bowl games that we've had in between. What do you got in your pocket for the NFL other than those games?
Well, what's really interesting too, John, is this. I don't know how often this has happened, if ever, but all four of the NFC East teams are positioned to be in the playoffs. I mean, give that a little bit of thought. So at the very top, you got the Philadelphia Eagles, who are now 13-1. That's not such a bad record, right? They're doing pretty well. Dallas Cowboys lost the game. Now they're 10-4, but they're sitting in a very nice spot at 10-4. You've got the Washington Commanders and the Giants, both. They played yesterday. This one the Giants got. So now it's 8-5-1 against 7-6-1. It's just amazing for me, John, to sit here and look and see four teams from that area, the NFC East, all potentially going to be there. But don't forget about one other, because Mark and I were talking about this last week as well, John, when he filled in. The Detroit Lions continue to win. They went out and played the Jets. Was it pretty? Absolutely not. When the Detroit Lions play, it generally isn't very pretty. But they got a great coach in Dan Campbell, who I absolutely love. I can't get enough of this guy. Our guy, Jared Goff, just continues to be in absolutely on fire mode over the last 5, 6, 7 games, throwing for a lot of yards, putting them in position, winning a lot of games against teams they're not supposedly supposed to beat. That team could sneak in, but I'll tell you what, they still need to make a couple strides. They got to basically win out. But who do you think? Do you think it's going to be all four, or do you think Detroit can make that move? They're now 7-7.
I think that, the Commanders are playing with a lot of heart, Pete, which doesn't surprise either of us because we know Ron Rivera. Again, he was our brother's roommate when they were together at Cal, playing on the football team at Cal. Both linebackers. But I've got to think that given that recent loss, Pete, and the fact that, the Detroit Lions are going to get a significant boost by being in, getting that momentum into these last days of the NFL season, I got to think that maybe they leapfrog in, and that would be tremendous because boy, it's always been Green Bay. And this year, of course, Green Bay's out of it. And instead, it's the Vikings, that have managed to, absent that Dallas game, Pete, the Vikings have just looked fantastic in terms of their ability to score. And if you get Detroit fired up, I think that's a team people don't want to play either.
Yeah, that offense has gotten great. The defense has improved a lot. They're still not great, but they've gotten improved a lot. And because of the offense doing so well, they've won 6 of the last 7. So they've really been on fire since that first part of the season where they just couldn't find it, and they were the usual Detroit Lions. So it should be a lot of fun just to see how this whole thing, unfolds in front of us. But it's going to be great, John. This is the most exciting NFL year I can remember because there are so many newer teams, and the Rams are terrible. The Chargers still might get in the playoffs, but they're kind of on the outside looking in. Maybe Seattle, Miami's kind of going into a spiral right now. I mean, everything is going on that's just incredible. Of course, Kansas City's great. Philadelphia is great. Vikings continue to be awesome. So there's a lot going on. And your quarterback the other day, he shows signs of a guy who could be an unbelievable player in the NFL, I think. I love the kid. He just needs to get more of a team around him in Chicago.
Yeah, needs at least one more big lineman that can keep people off of him because it's like a jailbreak every single pass play, Pete. They're coming after Fields, the kid from Ohio State that was our number 1 pick a couple years back. But, with his feet, he's been able to scramble. But when he's not, when they've got him pinned in, it's just sack after sack after sack.
Brutal.
They need some linemen.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Pete, thanks as usual. Folks, we hope you enjoyed the Rebel's Edge. We'll be back tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We've got 4 shows this week. This is the first one. We've got 3 more. Make sure you join us every day at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we'll see you tomorrow.